My name is Sarah, and my world changed in the blink of an eye. I never imagined that the life I thought I had would fall apart so quickly, so completely. Everything I believed in, love, loyalty, friendship, suddenly became nothing more than a cruel illusion. I had everything I wanted. A career I was proud of, a home filled with laughter, and most of all, Adam. He was everything I ever dreamed of. Kind, funny, smart, and the person I thought I would spend my forever with. We had plans, big plans. We talked about traveling the world together, growing old together, and building a family. I couldn't have asked for a better partner. At least that's what I thought. But nothing lasts forever. And sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who shatter our worlds when we least expect it. It was just an ordinary day, or so I thought. My phone buzzed while I was in the middle of preparing dinner. I thought it was a message from one of my friends, or perhaps a reminder from work. I picked it up absent-mindedly, but when I saw the message, my heart stopped. It was from an unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something about it felt wrong. I picked it up, not knowing that what I was about to read would change my life forever. The message read, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I didn't know how to tell you, but it's the truth. Adam and I have been seeing each other for months. I never wanted to hurt you, but I think it's time you know. It's over between you two." I stared at the screen for what seemed like forever, my mind struggling to process the words in front of me. The air around me felt thick, heavy, almost suffocating. I blinked, trying to make sense of it all, but the more I read, the clearer it became. Adam, my Adam, was in love with someone else. And not just anyone. Someone I had once considered a friend. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The life I had built, the love I had nurtured, it was all a lie. How could this happen? How could he do this to me? How could she betray me like this? I dropped my phone onto the couch, my hands trembling. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I tried to process what I had just read. My head was spinning, but there was only one thing on my mind. How could this be true? I couldn't just sit there and accept it. I had to confront him. I had to hear it from him. I dialed Adam's number, my fingers trembling. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Finally he picked up. His voice was quiet, distant, almost hesitant. "Hello," he said, his tone flat. "Adam, what is this?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The words felt foreign, like I had no control over them. "What's going on? Why is someone texting me this? Why are you telling me this way?" There was a long pause on the other end, a silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. I could almost feel the weight of his guilt through the phone. He wasn't ready for this, but here it was. The truth, raw and jagged. I didn't know how to tell you," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been seeing someone else for a while. I never meant to hurt you, but it's over." The words were like a slap to my face, the force of them sending a shockwave through my body. I could feel my heart physically breaking as the realization sank in. He didn't even care enough to say it to my face. No explanation, no apology, just a cold confession over the phone, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience. My mind was racing, but my body felt frozen, as if I were trapped in this moment, unable to move. The pain hit me like a wave, swallowing me whole. How could he do this? How could someone I trusted, someone I loved, betray me like this? Who is she? I managed to choke out, though the words barely felt like my own. They seemed to hang in the air, too fragile, too weak to handle the weight of what was coming. There was another silence, and in it, I could almost hear him battling with himself. "Her name is Kate," he finally confessed. I didn't want it to happen, but it just did. The words were empty, as if he had rehearsed them in his mind. But no amount of rehearsing could make them sound real. I couldn't speak. The world seemed to stop moving around me, everything blurring together as the truth became clearer and clearer. Kate, my friend, the one I had confided in, the one I trusted. And now, she had become the one who tore my world apart. I hung up the phone before he could say anything else, the sound of his voice still echoing in my ears. The tears that I had been holding back finally fell, hot and fast, as if my body had been waiting for the moment to finally break down. I stumbled to the living room, my knees giving way as the weight of everything crashed down on me. The life I had known, the love I had trusted, shattered before my eyes. In the hours that followed, I replayed everything in my head, trying to make sense of it all. How long had this been going on? Were there signs I had missed? How could I have been so blind? Every memory I had with him felt tainted now. Every moment shared seemed like a cruel joke. The texts, the dates, the quiet whispers in the night, all of it was a facade. They had been together for months, and I had been too trusting, too naive to see the truth. The pain of betrayal didn't just come from the loss of him. It came from the feeling that I had been a fool. The trust I had placed in both of them was shattered beyond repair, and I was left wondering if anything at all, had ever been real. What did I do wrong? Was I not good enough? Did I miss something? All of these questions swirled around in my mind, drowning me in doubt. My heartache was deeper than I could have ever imagined. But in that moment, something inside me began to stir. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was the beginning of something far greater. But that was a realization I wouldn't come to just yet. For now, I was left with the pain, the raw, excruciating pain of betrayal that would haunt me for what felt like an eternity. The days after that phone call felt like a blur. I could barely function, could barely think. The shock had settled deep inside me, like a cold, suffocating fog. Every part of me felt like it was broken. It was hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to believe that the life I had built was nothing more than a house of cards. Fragile, ready to fall apart with the slightest touch. But the worst part was that I couldn't escape the questions. They haunted me, every moment. The question I kept asking myself wasn't just why, it was how. How could this happen? How could Adam, the man I had trusted with my whole heart, betray me so completely? And more than that, how could Kate, my so-called best friend, be a part of it? I had spent years believing I was part of a team, a partnership, a friendship that was unbreakable. But in one single moment, everything changed. One simple phone call, one simple message, and the pieces of my life scattered into a million directions. I had spent days drowning in the shock, the pain, the disbelief. It was as if I was trapped in a dark room, unable to move, unable to escape. My world had been shattered into a million pieces, and I was left to pick them up. Every time I thought I was getting a grip on reality, the weight of the betrayal hit me again, harder, deeper, pulling me back into that abyss of hurt. But then, somewhere in the midst of the pain, I started to feel something else, something stronger. It was faint at first, like a small flicker in the distance. It was anger, yes, but it wasn't the mindless kind that burns with fury. This was something different, calm, controlled, and focused. It was the realization that I didn't have to be a victim anymore. I didn't have to live in the shadows of Adam's lies and Kate's betrayal. I was done with feeling broken. For days, I had let the tears flow, let the confusion reign, but that had to end. I couldn't let the choices they made define who I was. I couldn't let them steal my future, my happiness, my peace of mind. In the moments of quiet reflection, I began to realize that if I wanted to heal, I couldn't sit around waiting for apologies that would never come. I needed to take control. It was in the silence of my apartment, as I sat on the couch, my thoughts swirling in every direction, that it hit me. I will not let them break me. I was no longer that person who would just sit there, helpless, hoping things would get better on their own. I wasn't going to wait for Adam to have an epiphany, or for Kate to realize how badly she had hurt me. No. If I wanted my life back, I had to fight for it. And fighting didn't mean slashing out in anger. It meant taking back my power. I stood up, pacing around the room. My mind began to work, formulating a plan, not out of spite, not because I wanted to destroy them, but because I needed to regain my sense of self. I needed to prove that I could be better, stronger, and more than the person they thought I was. I thought about what I wanted. I wanted justice, not the kind that's found in revenge for revenge's sake, but the kind that restores balance, the kind that reminds people that their actions have consequences. And I was going to make sure Adam and Kate both understood the price of their betrayal. I wasn't going to crawl into a hole and cry forever. I was going to rise. I had my own plan. The first step in my plan was simple. I had to rediscover myself. For so long, I had been wrapped up in a life that revolved around someone else. Adam had been my everything, and Kate had been my closest confidant. But I had lost myself in the process. In the pain, I had forgotten who I truly was. And it was time to find that version of me again, the one that didn't need anyone else to feel whole. I decided to take a break from everything that reminded me of them. I deleted their numbers from my phone, Adam's and Kate's. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were moments I would be tempted to call them, to ask for answers I would never get, to beg them to explain why. But I had to stop thinking like that. I couldn't keep holding on to the hope that they would somehow fix this. I had to let go of the person I had been, because that version of me was gone. I began to focus on myself. I went back to the things I used to love, things that had been neglected in the midst of my relationship with Adam. I signed up for yoga classes again, something I hadn't done in months. I went out with friends who cared about me, friends who never lied, who never betrayed my trust. And I started writing. Writing became my outlet, my way of processing the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Every word I wrote felt like I was slowly piecing myself back together. Every story, every poem, every journal entry was a step toward healing. As the days went on, my emotional state shifted. What had once been a heavy weight around my heart began to lighten. The anger that once consumed me was replaced with clarity. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been before. No, I was determined to make sure Adam and Kate never forgot who I was. Determined to show them that I was stronger, better than they could ever imagine. But I wasn't going to make rash decisions based on blind fury. I needed a plan, a carefully calculated plan that would not only help me move on, but also send a clear message. Don't ever think you can take someone's trust and heart and walk away without consequences. I began to piece together my next steps, how to handle this situation in a way that didn't just give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me. I wanted them to see me rise. I wanted them to feel that the strength I was building would be the thing that defined me, not the pain they had caused me. I wasn't in a hurry. The emotional payoff wouldn't come quickly. I knew that, but I had time, and time was something I had learned to use wisely. I had spent days drowning in the shock, the pain, the disbelief. It was as if I was trapped in a dark room, unable to move, unable to escape. My world had been shattered into a million pieces, and I was left to pick them up. Every time I thought I was getting a grip on reality, the weight of the betrayal hit me again, harder, deeper, pulling me back into that abyss of hurt. But the worst part was that I couldn't escape the questions. They haunted me every moment. The question I kept asking myself wasn't just why, it was how. How could this happen? How could Adam, the man I had trusted with my whole heart, betray me so completely? And more than that, how could Kate, my so-called best friend, be a part of it? I had spent years believing I was part of a team, a partnership, a friendship that was unbreakable. But in one single moment, everything changed. One simple phone call, one simple message, and the pieces of my life scattered into a million directions. I had spent days drowning in the shock, the pain, the disbelief. It was as if I was trapped in a dark room, unable to move, unable to escape. My world had been shattered into a million pieces, and I was left to pick them up. Every time I thought I was getting a grip on reality, the weight of the betrayal hit me again, harder, deeper, pulling me back into that abyss of hurt. But then, somewhere in the midst of the pain, I started to feel something else, something stronger. It was faint at first, like a small flicker in the distance. It was anger, yes, but it wasn't the mindless kind that burns with fury. This was something different, calm, controlled, and focused. It was the realization that I didn't have to be a victim anymore. I didn't have to live in the shadows of Adam's lies and Kate's betrayal. I was done with feeling broken. For days, I had let the tears flow, let the confusion reign, but that had to end. I couldn't let the choices they made define who I was. I couldn't let them steal my future, my happiness, my peace of mind. In the moments of quiet reflection, I began to realize that if I wanted to heal, I couldn't sit around waiting for apologies that would never come. I needed to take control. It was in the silence of my apartment, as I sat on the couch, my thoughts swirling in every direction, that it hit me. I will not let them break me. I was no longer that person who would just sit there, helpless, hoping things would get better on their own. I wasn't going to wait for Adam to have an epiphany, or for Kate to realize how badly she had hurt me. No, if I wanted my life back, I had to fight for it. And fighting didn't mean slashing out in anger. It meant taking back my power. I stood up, pacing around the room. My mind began to work, formulating a plan, not out of spite, not because I wanted to destroy them, but because I needed to regain my sense of self. I needed to prove that I could be better, stronger, and more than the person they thought I was. I thought about what I wanted. I wanted justice, not the kind that's found in revenge for revenge's sake, but the kind that restores balance. The kind that reminds people that their actions have consequences. And I was going to make sure Adam and Kate both understood the price of their betrayal. I wasn't going to crawl into a hole and cry forever. I was going to rise. I had my own plan. The first step in my plan was simple. I had to rediscover myself. For so long, I had been wrapped up in a life that revolved around someone else. Adam had been my everything, and Kate had been my closest confidant. But I had lost myself in the process. In the pain, I had forgotten who I truly was, and it was time to find that version of me again, the one that didn't need anyone else to feel whole. I decided to take a break from everything that reminded me of them. I deleted their numbers from my phone, Adam's and Kate's. I knew it wouldn't be easy. There were moments I would be tempted to call them, to ask for answers I would never get, to beg them to explain why. But I had to stop thinking like that. I couldn't keep holding on to the hope that they would somehow fix this. I had to let go of the person I had been, because that version of me was gone. I began to focus on myself. I went back to the things I used to love, things that had been neglected in the midst of my relationship with Adam. I signed up for yoga classes again, something I hadn't done in months. I went out with friends who cared about me, friends who never lied, who never betrayed my trust. And I started writing. Writing became my outlet, my way of processing the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside me. Every word I wrote felt like I was slowly piecing myself back together. Every story, every poem, every journal entry was a step toward healing. As the days went on, my emotional state shifted. What had once been a heavy weight around my heart began to lighten. The anger that once consumed me was replaced with clarity. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been before. No, I was determined. Determined to make sure Adam and Kate never forgot who I was. Determined to show them that I was stronger, better than they could ever imagine. But I wasn't going to make rash decisions based on blind fury. I needed a plan, a carefully calculated plan that would not only help me move on, but also send a clear message. Don't ever think you can take someone's trust and heart and walk away without consequences. I began to piece together my next steps, how to handle this situation in a way that didn't just give them the satisfaction of knowing they had broken me. I wanted them to see me rise. I wanted them to feel that the strength I was building would be the thing that defined me, not the pain they had caused me. I wasn't in a hurry. The emotional payoff wouldn't come quickly. I knew that, but I had time, and time was something I had learned to use wisely. I had isolated myself, retreating into a shell of quiet grief and anger. I didn't want to let anyone in, but sometimes life has a way of surprising you, of throwing people into your path when you least expect it. That's how I met Maya. Maya had been my colleague for a few years. We worked in the same office, but we weren't particularly close. She was one of those people who blended into the background, always friendly, but never intrusive. A quiet, competent presence, who you could count on to get the job done. But someone I never considered as someone I could confide in. It was at a work event that we started talking. I didn't plan on it. I was there in body but not in spirit. My mind was still reeling from everything that had happened with Adam and Kate. But I was trying to keep up appearances, to smile, to pretend that I was okay when I was far from it. Maya was the one who noticed. It wasn't anything big, just a brief moment where our eyes met, and she must have seen something in mine. Without saying a word, she led me to a quieter corner of the room and just sat with me, listening to the noise of the party around us. She didn't ask anything at first. She just let me breathe. Let the silence speak for itself. And that's when I realized how much I needed someone who wasn't going to judge me, someone who was willing to let me just be broken for a while. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, Maya said softly, her voice gentle but firm. But I can tell something's weighing on you, and if you ever need to unload, I'm here. Her words were like a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still raw. There was no pressure, no expectations, just an open door. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe I could trust someone again. Maybe it wasn't all lost. Over the next few weeks, Maya and I began talking more. First in small doses, then with more depth. It wasn't long before I found myself spilling everything to her. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the fury that had kept me awake at night. She listened, offering little more than a nod or a gentle word of reassurance. But it was enough. I found myself looking forward to our conversations, not just because she made me feel heard, but because there was a strength in her that I had never noticed before. One I desperately needed. One evening, we met for dinner. Maya had become one of the few people I could stand to be around, without feeling like I was putting on a mask. As we sipped our wine, the conversation shifted, and I found myself talking about the plans I had begun to form. The plan for justice. The plan to take back control of my life. I need to do something about this, I told her, my voice steady, though my insides were still a whirlwind of emotion. I need to make them understand that what they did wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal, and they need to pay for it. Maya's eyes softened, and I saw something flicker in them. An understanding, an acknowledgement that I wasn't just talking about revenge. I was talking about reclaiming my dignity. I get it, she said, her voice low. But revenge, it can consume you. It's easy to lose yourself in it. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm not going to lose myself. I'm going to take back what they took from me. And I need help. Maya leaned forward, her expression serious now. I'm in, she said simply. But this is going to take strategy, not just anger. In that moment, I realized that Maya wasn't just offering her support. She was offering me a way out of the darkness. She had a clarity that I had lost in the chaos of my emotions. Maya had a sharp mind, a strategic mind. She wasn't just sympathetic. She was smart. And for the first time since everything had collapsed, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. I had someone who was not just going to sympathize with my pain, but who was going to help me turn it into something powerful. The plan began to take shape. Slowly, carefully, we mapped out every step, every move. We made sure to cover our tracks, to be strategic. We didn't want to be reckless. Maya helped me see the bigger picture. It wasn't about destroying Adam and Kate. It was about making sure they understood that actions have consequences. And in the process, I realized that this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me, about regaining the confidence I had lost, about reclaiming my power. One of the first steps in the plan was subtle but important. I knew that both Adam and Kate thought they could simply walk away, never facing the consequences of what they had done. They had been living their lives without a care in the world, while I was left to pick up the pieces. But it wasn't going to be like that anymore. I was going to show them that their actions didn't go unnoticed. Maya and I carefully orchestrated a series of small but significant moves. First, I re-established myself in the social circles Adam and Kate had once been a part of. Slowly, I started to gain back the respect I had lost, one conversation at a time. It wasn't about petty revenge, but about reasserting my place in the world, showing everyone that I was still me, that I was still capable of standing tall. After everything they'd tried to break, the next step was even more subtle. I knew that Adam had always been proud of his achievements, his social standing, his reputation, so I made sure to subtly showcase my own successes. It wasn't about bragging, but about quietly reminding him, and anyone who might be watching, that I was capable, successful, and strong. As the weeks went on, I felt the power shift in my favor. The plan was working. I had regained control of my life. And more importantly, I had regained control of my sense of self. Adam and Kate might have believed that they could destroy me, but they didn't realize that they had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to rebuild myself into someone stronger than I had ever been. But the emotional payoff was still delayed. I knew the first strike was only the beginning. I knew they wouldn't feel the full weight of it just yet, but I also knew they would start feeling the shift. Slowly, subtly, they would begin to see the power I was reclaiming. And yet, the emotional payoff was still delayed. I knew the first strike was only the beginning. I knew they wouldn't feel the full weight of it just yet, but I also knew they would start feeling the shift. Slowly, subtly, they would begin to see the power I was reclaiming. The real moment of reckoning would come later. But for now, I was content to let the tension build, to let them sweat, to let them wonder just how much they had truly lost. The most dangerous kind of revenge is the one that's not immediate, not explosive. It's the kind that sneaks up on you, silent and slow, until one day you realize that everything has changed. That's what I was going for. I wasn't going to throw myself into an emotional outburst that left me vulnerable. No, I was going to take my time, to be strategic. It would be a slow burn, a plan executed in small methodical steps. It's easy to think of revenge as some grand spectacle, like a firework display where you watch it explode and feel the rush of victory. But the real power, the real justice, comes from the subtle moments, the ones where you regain control without anyone noticing at first. I had learned that much from Maya. Revenge, as she had reminded me, wasn't about burning bridges. It was about taking back what was mine, quietly, intelligently, and with patience. And that was exactly what I was about to do. The first step in my plan was something so simple, so quiet, that no one would ever think it was the beginning of my comeback. But in that simplicity, I found power. Adam had always prided himself on his professional connections, his reputation in the community, his status as the guy who knew everyone. I had never really cared for that part of him, but I'd noticed how much it mattered to him. He loved the spotlight, the praise, the sense that people looked up to him, and that was exactly where I would start. I reconnected with a few of his colleagues, people I had once shared casual conversations with at gatherings. They didn't know the details of our breakup. Most of them had just assumed we had drifted apart for reasons unknown. But that was the beauty of it. They had no idea how much they could influence the balance of power. They had no idea they were about to become pawns in my game of quiet retribution. I reached out to one of his close work colleagues, Nina, who had always seemed to appreciate my presence in the group. Over coffee one afternoon, we exchanged pleasantries. and as the conversation flowed, I casually mentioned that I was thinking of re-entering the professional scene, maybe starting my own consultancy. I made sure she knew that I had been networking with a few influential people and was considering some interesting projects. Nina was intrigued. Of course she was. What woman wouldn't be curious when another one, especially someone who had always been the supporting partner, suddenly started talking about taking charge of her own future? "I've been thinking about a few ideas myself," she said, clearly impressed. "Let me know if you ever need any connections, Sarah. I know some people who might be able to help." I smiled softly, my mind already moving on to the next part of the plan. Nina would be my bridge. I would be subtle, planting the seeds of my potential success in places where Adam was vulnerable. And when I was ready, I'd use those seeds to take root and blossom into something that would make him feel like everything he had once thought was secure was slipping away. But this wasn't going to happen overnight. The emotional payoff wasn't going to come immediately. If I wanted to regain control, I needed to let these small moments unfold, one after the other, carefully orchestrated. It had to feel organic, natural, not forced or vengeful. The next part of my plan was to focus on Kate. She thought I had disappeared from her life. She thought she was rid of me, that her new relationship with Adam would be a fresh start. But that's where she was wrong. I wasn't going to let her forget what happened. I began subtly working my way into the circles she frequented. I knew Kate was active on social media, always posting about her new beginnings and her perfect life with Adam. But I wasn't going to attack her directly. That would be too obvious, too messy. Instead, I worked behind the scenes, leveraging the network I had built and gently inserting myself into her world in a way that would make her uncomfortable, but not immediately. She would start seeing my name, my face, in places she hadn't expected. Small, seemingly innocent interactions, but enough to rattle her composure. I started by attending a few events I knew she would be at, but never making it too obvious. A gallery opening here, a book launch there. I made sure to engage in conversations with people she knew, but I never approached her directly. I knew that this method would keep her guessing, wondering how much I knew, wondering how much of her life I was touching without her permission. And sure enough, after a few weeks, I got the first text. "Hey, I saw you at the gallery. Didn't expect to run into you there. How's everything going?" The text was harmless on the surface, but underneath, it was a seed of anxiety for Kate. She didn't know how much I knew, how far I was willing to go to remind her that she hadn't gotten away with anything. I responded casually, of course, but with just enough subtext to make her question herself. "Oh, everything's great. Funny running into you there. I'm just getting back into the swing of things. How about you and Adam?" Settling in, I could almost feel her unease through the phone screen. I knew she would read between the lines. The message wasn't a threat. It was a reminder that I was still here, and that I wasn't going anywhere. As the weeks passed, I continued this slow, methodical process. I wasn't looking for big, dramatic moments. I wasn't looking to cause a scene or create a spectacle. I was building my revenge, piece by piece, until Adam and Kate both realized they hadn't escaped unscathed. They thought they had moved on. They thought they were in control. But what they didn't realize was that every time I engaged with their world, every time I moved a little closer, they were losing control. And yet, the emotional payoff was still delayed. I knew the first strike was only the beginning. I knew they wouldn't feel the full weight of it just yet, but I also knew they would start feeling the shift. Slowly, subtly, they would begin to see the power I was reclaiming. The real moment of reckoning would come later. But for now, I was content to let the tension build, to let them sweat, to let them wonder just how much they had truly lost. It was strange how the human heart works. You can be shattered into a million pieces, broken beyond repair, and yet somehow, with time, you find that your heart doesn't just heal, it transforms. It becomes stronger, more resilient. And in the quietest moments, the ones when you least expect it, you realize that you've changed. I had spent so long looking for answers, seeking revenge, holding on to my anger, that I hadn't realized how much power I had already taken back. I had been so consumed by the need for justice, so wrapped up in the idea of making them feel the way I did, that I hadn't truly stopped to think about the kind of person I wanted to be on the other side of it. I had been chasing vengeance, but what I was really searching for was peace. The kind of peace that comes from within, not from the suffering of others. I sat at a cafe one afternoon, sipping my coffee when it hit me. I had been so focused on making Adam and Kate understand the pain they had caused me, that I hadn't truly stopped to think about the kind of person I wanted to be once this chapter of my life had closed. I had been chasing revenge, but what I was really searching for was peace. The kind of peace that comes from within, not from the suffering of others. I had built my entire plan, my entire emotional state, on the idea that if I made them suffer, if I watched them feel the same pain I did, then I would feel better. But the truth was, I was already better. I had already taken back my life. I was no longer a victim of their betrayal. And I realized, in that instant, that I didn't need them to feel my pain, to feel whole again. I didn't need revenge to feel better. I needed to heal. The anger that had once consumed me began to fade, replaced with something else. It was clarity. Clarity that the power I had been searching for had been mine all along. It wasn't in the destruction of others, but in the quiet reclamation of my peace, my dignity, my sense of self. I spent the next few days reflecting on what had happened, not with bitterness, but with a sense of deep understanding. The pain of betrayal had taken me to a place where I felt lost, where I didn't know who I was anymore. But now, I saw that I had been rebuilding myself all along. Each small step I took had been a step toward reclaiming my worth, toward healing, toward becoming someone who could face anything and still stand tall. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first found out about the betrayal. That woman was broken, shattered. But this woman was whole, strong, unshakable. I didn't need Adam or Kate or anyone else to give me validation anymore. I was enough. I had always been enough. And that was the moment when everything shifted. I didn't need to make them feel my pain. I didn't need to cause them suffering to make myself feel better. The real revenge, the real justice, was in my growth, in the way I had taken control of my life and built something far greater than the pain they had caused me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And with that freedom came peace. Real peace. Not the peace that comes from watching others suffer, but the peace that comes from knowing that no one could ever take away my worth again. I had reclaimed my life, not by making them pay for what they did to me, but by moving forward and letting go of the hold they still had over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The weight that had been pressing down on me for so long was gone. I had made it through. I had survived. And I had come out on the other side, stronger than I had ever been before. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Not the destruction of others, not the revenge I had been plotting for so long, but the peace I had found within myself. That was the real justice. That was the real revenge. The moment I had been waiting for was finally here. The one where I would no longer be the victim. The one where I would no longer allow my pain to define me. The betrayal was no longer just something that festered inside me. It was something I had to face head on, something I had to address and take control of. And this time, I would do it on my terms. I had spent months preparing for this moment, mentally, emotionally, and strategically. Every step I had taken, every decision I had made, had been leading up to this confrontation. It was no longer about revenge. It was about regaining control, about finding closure, and about standing tall in front of the people who had tried to break me. The sun was setting as I pulled up to the cafe where I had agreed to meet them. My heart was calm now. the initial rush of adrenaline replaced by a quiet confidence. This was no longer about anger or pain. This was about strength, my strength. I walked inside and spotted them immediately. Adam and Kate, sitting together at a corner table, laughing like everything was normal. The sight of them together still sent a pang of hurt through my chest. But I had learned to acknowledge that pain and move past it. They were no longer the center of my world, and they never would be again. As I approached the table, they looked up, their faces momentarily frozen in surprise. They hadn't expected this, hadn't expected me to show up, but I was here, and I wasn't going to back down. Mind if I join you? I asked, my voice steady, calm. Adam shifted in his seat, his usual cocky demeanor faltering slightly. Kate, on the other hand, looked guilty, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. Of course, Adam said, his voice strained, as if he was unsure of how to address the situation. I know what you were doing. I cut him off, my words sharp but measured. And I know exactly what happened between the two of you. There was a moment of silence. Adam opened his mouth as if to say something, but he closed it again. Kate shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes avoiding mine. The tension in the air was palpable, but I wasn't going to let them dictate the pace anymore. This was my moment, and I was in control. I took a seat across from them, sitting up straight, my eyes unwavering. I don't want to waste my time rehashing what you did, I continued, my voice low but firm. I don't need an explanation from either of you. I don't need your apologies. What I need from you is the truth, and nothing else. Adam opened his mouth again, but I raised my hand, signaling for him to stop. You think I'm here to beg you for answers, for closure? I'm not. I've already given you that power for far too long, and I'm done. This is not about you, Adam. And this is definitely not about you, Kate. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. Kate's face paled, and Adam shifted in his seat. The cockiness he'd once displayed now replaced by nervousness. They weren't used to seeing me like this. Calm, composed, unshaken. Then why are you here? Kate finally spoke, her voice shaky, her eyes still avoiding mine. I'm here, I said, locking eyes with her, because I need you to understand something. What you did, what both of you did, doesn't define me. It never did, and it never will. Adam shifted in his seat, his discomfort growing. Sarah, we never meant to hurt you. I held up my hand again, silencing him. Save it, Adam. I don't need your excuses. You both betrayed me, plain and simple. And maybe you think that by sitting here, by pretending everything is fine, that I'll just forget what happened. But I won't. Not ever. I paused, letting the words settle between us. You see, I don't need revenge to feel better, I continued, my voice low but unwavering. I don't need you to suffer for me to feel whole again. I'm past that. The truth is, I'm better off without you. And the hardest thing for me to admit, the hardest thing for me to accept, was that I needed to stop relying on you to make me feel okay. I had to learn that I'm enough on my own. For a moment, they said nothing. Adam looked like he was about to speak, but I wasn't finished yet. This was the most important part, the part I needed them to hear. You see, I don't need revenge to feel better, I continued, my voice steady. I don't need you to suffer for me to feel whole again. I'm past that. The truth is, I'm better off without you. And the hardest thing for me to admit, the hardest thing for me to accept, was that I needed to stop relying on you to make me feel okay. I had to learn that I'm enough on my own. Kate looked at me, her eyes wide, her expression a mix of guilt and disbelief. She opened her mouth to say something, but I stopped her with a look. I'm not angry, I said, the words coming out clearer now. I'm not bitter, and I'm not going to waste another second of my life on you two. What you did doesn't affect me anymore. It doesn't affect who I am. I've moved on. I've healed. And now I'm taking back everything you tried to take from me. There was a long silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. Adam and Kate sat there, speechless, unable to respond. This was not the confrontation they had expected. There was no shouting, no tears, no dramatic confrontation. Instead, it was quiet, controlled, powerful. For the first time since I found out about their betrayal, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. I think we're done here, I said, standing up slowly. You both don't need to worry about me anymore. I have everything I need, and you don't have a place in my life anymore. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving them both sitting in stunned silence behind me. For the first time in months, I felt lighter, like I had finally released everything that had been weighing me down. I wasn't looking for big dramatic moments anymore. I had long ago come to the realization that revenge wasn't about making someone else suffer. It was about making sure I never let anyone define my worth again. I didn't need Adam or Kate to pay for what they'd done to me. I was already living a life they couldn't touch. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The past few months had been a process of rediscovering myself, of reclaiming things I had forgotten. My career, my passions, my confidence. These were all parts of me that had been buried under layers of hurt, doubt, and anger. But now, with each passing day, I felt stronger. I was no longer just surviving. I was thriving. The woman who had once been shattered by their betrayal was now standing tall, and the world around me had begun to recognize it. I didn't need Adam and Kate to acknowledge my growth. I didn't need them to see me for who I had become. It was enough that I knew. It was enough that I had found the strength to take my life back into my own hands. That was my true revenge. In the weeks that followed, things started to fall into place in ways I hadn't expected. Opportunities, ones I hadn't dared to hope for before, began to present themselves. I was invited to speak at conferences, to mentor up-and-coming professionals, to write articles that would get noticed. It felt like the universe was rewarding me for choosing the high road, for choosing to grow, rather than stay bitter. The most powerful moments weren't the awards, the recognition, or the success. It was the way I felt when I walked into a room full of people who didn't know my past, who only knew the woman I was now. I had spent so long being defined by the hurt I had endured, but now I was being defined by the woman I had become. It wasn't just the outside world that was noticing. I was noticing it too. I had become someone I was proud of, someone who had taken the pain, the betrayal, and turned it into something far more powerful than anger. One day, I received an email from a major publication. They wanted to feature my story in an article about people who had overcome personal challenges and built successful careers. I sat there, reading the email, and couldn't help but smile. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same person who had been left heartbroken, who had once thought she was unworthy of anything good, was now someone others looked up to. It was a full circle moment. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. But the most beautiful part of this was that none of this success came from the destruction of anyone else. I didn't need to make Adam or Kate feel the way I had felt. I didn't need to tear them down to build myself up. I built myself from the inside out, and in doing so, I realized that no amount of external success could ever match the satisfaction of reclaiming my own peace of mind. As time went on, I found myself thinking about Adam and Kate less and less. They didn't haunt my thoughts the way they used to. I didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal whenever their names crossed my mind. It wasn't that I had forgiven them. It was that I had forgiven myself. I had forgiven myself for the pain I had allowed to linger for so long. I had let go of the need for them to feel the same hurt I did. What mattered now was that I was free, free from the past, free from their control, and free to build the life I wanted. And then came the realization that I didn't even need to be angry at them anymore. They had thought they could take everything from me. They thought they could break me. But the truth was, all they had done was wake up something inside me, a strength I didn't even know I had. The best part of me had always been inside me, and I had finally unlocked it. They had underestimated me, and in doing so, they had given me the greatest gift of all, the chance to become someone even stronger than before. I wasn't waiting for them to suffer anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to see the consequences of their actions. They were no longer relevant. The life I had created for myself was full of meaning, full of purpose, and none of that had anything to do with them. My revenge was in the way I had chosen to heal, to grow, and to rise above it all. My revenge was in the life I had created for myself, and in that, I found peace. Real peace, the kind that doesn't come from watching others crumble. The kind that comes from knowing you have the power to heal yourself, to rise from the ashes, and to build something better. The kind of peace that is your own, unshakable and undeniable. I had taken control of my own destiny, and there was nothing more satisfying than that. Adam and Kate, and everyone who had doubted me, had become a distant memory. They no longer had a place in my life, in my heart, or in my story. I had built my life from the ground up, and in doing so, I had found the peace and fulfillment I had been searching for all along. It's strange, really, how time has a way of making everything seem smaller. The things that once felt so overwhelming, so all-consuming, gradually become distant memories. It wasn't too long ago that I had found myself shattered, lost in the debris of a life I thought I knew. I had been betrayed by the people I loved, and for a while, I let that betrayal define me. I spent so much of my time consumed by anger, resentment, and hurt that I almost forgot what it felt like to breathe without the weight of it pressing down on me. But now, I stood in a place of peace, something I had never thought possible in the aftermath of everything. I wasn't who I used to be. I wasn't broken anymore. I had healed, and I had grown stronger than I ever thought I could. There was a quiet strength in me now, a strength that didn't come from anger or revenge. It came from surviving, from choosing to rise after being knocked down. It came from realizing that the pain I had felt, the heartbreak I had endured, wasn't the end of me. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one that I was writing with my own hands. As the days passed, I began to look at my life in a way I never had before. I no longer saw myself as the victim of their betrayal. I saw myself as someone who had been tested, who had been through hell and come out on the other side. And while I didn't wish for the pain I had experienced, I realized that it had shaped me into someone stronger, someone more resilient. The truth is, what Adam and Kate had taken from me wasn't just my trust. It was my sense of worth, my belief that I was enough. But in taking that, they had unknowingly given me something far more valuable, the chance to rebuild. They had given me the space to find myself again, to discover that I didn't need anyone else's validation to feel whole. I was enough, just as I was. It wasn't easy. It took time, it took effort, and it took facing the reality of the betrayal head on. But with each step I took, I felt a little lighter, a little freer. I began to rebuild not just my life, but my sense of self. I didn't need revenge to feel better about what had happened. I didn't need them to suffer for me to feel whole again. What I needed was to take control of my own future, to move forward with purpose and strength, and to stop letting the past define my worth. The first major step in moving forward was finding my career again. It wasn't just about getting back to work. It was about finding something that mattered to me, something that felt aligned with who I had become. I had spent too long letting my career be something I did to fulfill someone else's expectations. But now it was mine. I started working on projects I was passionate about. I took on challenges that scared me, and each time I succeeded, I felt the pieces of my confidence coming back together. The recognition wasn't what mattered. Not really. It was the quiet satisfaction I found in doing something that was truly mine, that had nothing to do with Adam or Kate or anyone else. I was doing it for me, and that was the most powerful thing I could have done. As I spent more time focusing on my career, I also began to focus on my personal life. The friends I had once pushed away in the wake of my heartbreak, I started bringing back into my life. I reached out to the people who had always supported me, who had been there through the tough times, and I started to rebuild those relationships. They had been waiting patiently for me to come back into their lives. and I was finally ready to let them back in. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. I had already proven everything I needed to myself. The validation I had sought for so long was now irrelevant. I had found it, not in the applause of others, but in the quiet moments of self-assurance that came from knowing I had done the work. I had healed. I had moved on, and I was stronger than ever. And then came the realization, the one I had been waiting for all along, the moment when I knew, with certainty, that I had truly moved past the betrayal. It wasn't about Adam or Kate anymore. It wasn't about them at all. It was about me, about the life I had built, the person I had become. And as I looked around at the life I had created, I realized that it was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. The quiet moments were the ones that brought me the most peace. The mornings spent writing in my journal. The evenings spent walking through the city I had learned to love again. The moments where I didn't think about what had happened to me or the people who had hurt me. The moments where I simply lived. And that's when I realized that the real victory wasn't in revenge. It wasn't in making Adam or Kate feel the pain I had once felt. The real victory was in finding peace within myself, in letting go of the past, and stepping into a future that was mine. A future full of possibility, full of hope, full of strength. I thought back to the days when I had first learned about the betrayal, when everything seemed impossible. I thought about the heartache, the tears, the nights I spent wondering how I would ever get through it. But now I could look back without pain. The memory of it no longer stung. I had turned it into something meaningful. I had turned it into fuel for the fire of my own transformation. And with that transformation came a sense of finality. The chapter on Adam and Kate was closed. It wasn't a bitter ending though. It was a peaceful one. They no longer had a place in my story. I had written a new one, and it was one of empowerment, of growth, of resilience. I wasn't just walking away from the past. I was walking toward the future I was building with my own hands. And as I looked ahead, I saw nothing but possibility. There was no more doubt, no more fear. I had let go of the things that had held me back, and I had embraced the woman I had become. It was the end of one story, but it was also the beginning of another. And this time, it was a story where I was in control, a story where I didn't need anyone else's validation, where I was strong enough to face whatever came my way. A story where the past was no longer a chain. It was a stepping stone to the future. As I looked forward, I knew that the best was yet to come. And for the first time in a long time, I felt excited for what lay ahead. Not because of anyone else, but because of what I had built. Because of who I had become. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.